cleaner oceans, tackling climate change, creating jobs, uplifting low-income regions, and creating positive outcomes and opportunities for Tangata Whenua. These are just a few of the incredible opportunities that seaweed aquaculture could provide for Aotearoa, New Zealand. So to give you a bit of background, globally, the seaweed industry has been growing exponentially. In fact, it is the fastest growing primary industry in the world and is worth $6 billion US. However, seaweed production is comprised of two components. There is seaweed wild harvest, which is seaweed that has been taken from the wild stocks of the ocean, and then there is seaweed aquaculture, which is seaweed that has been farmed for a purpose. Now, as you'll see in the graph behind me, seaweed wild harvest has been stagnant over the past 50 to 60 years, while seaweed aquaculture has been the source of the exponential growth you can see behind me. Now, unfortunately, here in New Zealand, we only have seaweed wild harvest as a means of production, and we do not have any seaweed aquaculture right now. So our aquaculture industry is worth $500 million at the moment, and our government has already signalled their intent to grow this to $3 billion by 2035. This is an ambitious goal and one that can be achieved with the help of seaweed aquaculture. Now here in New Zealand, we have a unique opportunity. We have over 800 seaweed species. We have temperate growing conditions, clean waters. We have a strong reputation for high quality exports, and we have the 7th largest coastline in the world. And we also have the 3rd largest exclusive economic zone, which essentially means we have the 3rd most marine resources in the world. And we also have many iwi groups who have extensive intergenerational knowledge and mātauranga Māori that they can contribute to driving this industry forwards. Now, in terms of the seaweed itself, there are a range of applications, and they depend on a number of variables. These variables include the type of species you use, whether it's a red species or a brown species or a green species. It depends on the extraction methods you use, the compounds you're targeting, and the part of the plant that you're isolating. All these contribute to a number of applications, some of which are pharmaceuticals, food products, fertilizers, animal health products, reducing cattle methane emissions, and a range of other applications I haven't even touched on here. Now, due to the range of applications and species that are on offer, it's important to identify a target species to get this industry off the ground here in New Zealand. Now, Aquaculture radiata is a great species for this. It is a native New Zealand species which is on 147 commercial fishing licenses already, meaning it's easy to implement regarding the regulations here in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's also a uniquely New Zealand species, meaning no one else in the world has this species at the moment, and it grows well around the country. And finally, it already has a number of established applications as fertilizers and as food products. One company that is using Aquaculture radiata already is Agrasea. Now, they produce a number of animal health and animal tonics, pasture nutrition products, and fertilizers. They use Aquaculture radiata shorecast, which essentially is when seaweed is ripped up off the ocean floor and cast ashore during a storm. Now, this makes the supply of seaweed for companies like Agrasea very temperamental, inconsistent, and unreliable. Companies like Agrasea would seriously benefit from establishing a seaweed aquaculture industry here in New Zealand. Now, we developed a suggested model for introducing seaweed aquaculture into New Zealand. It would essentially involve using existing mussel farming infrastructure and resources to establish the seaweed farming practices. They would use similar long-line technologies which are seeded and then submerged underwater and left for the seaweed to grow up. The ropes would then be taken out of the water, the seaweed would be harvested and then minimally processed. Now, when I say minimally processed, I mean it would be dried and perhaps chopped or milled, depending on what the manufacturer would require. The seaweed would then be sent away and produced into whatever product that the manufacturer requires. Now, what this model really hinges on is the interaction and collaboration with mussel farmers, as we would be using their existing infrastructure. Now, seaweed can work really well with this idea and this model because it grows well all year round, which essentially means during the off-peak season for mussels, you can be harvesting your seaweed, making sure you continually use your resources and make efficient use of the infrastructure and the space we already have. Another key aspect of this model is the collaboration with Tangata Whenua and their Mātauranga Māori. These iwi groups have been around for hundreds of years, and they've seen seaweed in the environment that it grows in, they understand it, and they've developed a range of intergenerational knowledge that they can contribute and they can use to push this industry forward. I really think this diagram here, this piece of artwork, really illustrates what we're trying to do with these industries that we're developing. It's about the interaction between the air, the sky, the water, and the land, and the interconnectedness of Mātauranga Māori and Western science principles. A group that's already doing some incredible work in this space is the Whakatuhi Māori Trust Board, who operate just out of Ohiwa Harbour. They have a majority ownership in Eastern Sea Farms, who have over 10,000 hectares of marine farming space already consented to them. Now, they're a predominantly mussel farming based operation, and they've already signalled their intent and their interest in seaweed aquaculture and the potential that it has to work in tandem with mussel farming. So based on the model that I've just discussed, we developed some conservative revenue estimates and determined that this model is certainly viable for New Zealand. We've shown that by targeting the domestic agricultural industry, so companies like Agrosea, that we could produce $66 million of revenue alone if we used the vacant space that is in New Zealand right now. And that's using only 0.5% of our exclusive economic zone. Just imagine the potential that there is for economic growth here. Now, in terms of the economic and social benefits, as I just stated on the slide before, there is a huge potential to contribute towards economic growth. There are a range of applications that we didn't even consider when we did our economic forecasts that are of much higher value, like considering the global market, the food market, and pharmaceuticals, which are much higher value and will create many more jobs. Would also reduce seasonal and frictional unemployment, as those workers that were usually laid off at the end of the mussel harvesting period would now be continually employed, and that would increase the number of jobs in the region and increase social cohesion, as you're not getting employees leaving the industry all the time. We're also future-proofing the economy, because seaweed aquaculture is one of those sustainable, environmentally friendly industries. By investing in an industry like this, we're really bolstering the economy and preparing it for future challenges that lie ahead in terms of our environment. We're also reducing income inequality, because seaweed aquaculture and aquaculture in general tends to be concentrated in small coastal regions which have lower than average annual income levels. By increasing aquaculture and investing in seaweed aquaculture, we'd be creating jobs for these regions and uplifting them, creating better equality in New Zealand. And finally, we're creating positive outcomes and opportunities for Tangata Whenua, who already have a large share in the aquaculture industry and have a huge importance in propelling this industry forward with their intergenerational knowledge and Mātauranga Māori. Now, there are a suite of environmental benefits from seaweed aquaculture. So seaweed is a nutrient absorber, which means it basically sucks up all the unwanted nutrients that are in the waterways and in the environment. What this means is it works well in what are called multi-trophic aquaculture systems. These are systems where multiple species are farmed in tandem. So for example, seaweed, mussels, and say salmon would all be farmed together, and the waste that comes from the salmon and the mussels is absorbed by the seaweed, cleaning the waterways and producing biomass. This creates a really circular system, which is how we should be focusing on operating here in New Zealand. We're also restoring and maintaining ecosystems as we're cleaning the waterways, reducing the environmental impact of our farming space. We're also creating a natural environment, a natural habitat for marine ecosystems, as this is what seaweed does naturally anyway. And finally, seaweed is a carbon dioxide absorber. This means it can absorb CO2 from the atmosphere and uptake it and remove it from the system, contributing positively to our efforts to mitigate climate change. So the next steps are really about testing and doing trials. So getting out there, we've already got the infrastructure, so getting out there and doing tests and learning about how different species perform, how they grow, and how it would work around mussel farming harvesting periods. So I really think this isn't about waiting 10 years till we have all that knowledge from laboratory tests. I think this is about getting out there right now while we have the infrastructure at our fingertips and doing some tests and learning while doing. Another important thing is establishing strong partnerships with iwi, with mussel farms, and with government, who have a strong interest in aquaculture. The interaction with government is also hugely important in removing some of the pesky red tape that's currently inhibiting the industry at the moment. And finally, it's about putting a New Zealand spin on the seaweed aquaculture industry. This is something we are great at as a tiny country. We have some incredible industries that are world renowned and have high quality reputations all around the country and all around the world. Say our dairy and our kiwi fruit industries, for example. We've innovated and we've marketed and we've shown our potential as a country to produce high value products. I really think that seaweed has the potential to be the next one of these big industries for New Zealand, and it's just about going there and taking it to that level. Now I'd just like to leave you with something that I found incredibly startling. We have 23 times more marine resources than we do terrestrial resources. Yet most of our production comes from the land. This is not how it should be. And we have the opportunity to change that right now. Thank you.